So I've completed my, I believe, third playthrough of Mass Effect Andromeda, and I have a lot of different feelings about the game and how I think it's going to kind of impact the future of the franchise, namely the next Mass Effect game that we believe is currently in production. So hang out. I want to talk about everything, how it's going to affect the future. Let's jump into it. So if you're new, this is the first video of mine you've seen. I just got into Mass Effect with the Legendary Edition back in 2021. I knew of Mass Effect. I knew how much people loved it. I believe back when I worked at GameStop in the mid-late 2000s, I actually worked at least a couple of the midnight releases at GameStop when I was in college. It was just a franchise that passed me by. Back in those days, I was the Madden, Call of Duty guy. That's kind of all I cared about. I hadn't really gotten into RPGs and stuff quite yet. In my older years, I have. And when the Legendary Edition came out, I latched onto this franchise, and I've really enjoyed it ever since. Now, I love the trilogy. I've played it. We're probably coming up on 30 playthroughs at this point in about 4.5 years. Not even sure if I'm proud of that or not. We'll just talk about that another time. But I've also done a couple playthroughs of Andromeda. Now, Mass Effect Andromeda, if you're not a big fan of the franchise, you just kind of know it maybe as this kind of outlier, this game that had not the best reception, that was really buggy, has a lot of thoughts around it, right? But I at least have wanted to give it a chance. So I've played it twice on Xbox Series X, and it's not the best experience for various reasons. So one thing to consider about the timing of Mass Effect Andromeda is I believe it came out in 2017. That was obviously a few years before the PS5 and Series X, but it was around the time of the last generation's mid-gen refreshes. So if you remember, the PlayStation 4 Pro and the Xbox One X came out, the Scorpio. And those were interesting because the base PS4 and Xbox One were pretty mediocre devices the day they came out. The unique thing about them is they were using laptop hardware, essentially, which is always spec'd down because it has to be more energy efficient. It just isn't as powerful, the graphics processing and so on. And so those consoles were kind of rough from the start. And then these mid-gen refreshes gave pretty significant upgrades, to graphics and capability. And so a lot of games in that generation put out patches allowing like 60 frames per second play and higher resolutions and stuff like that. Well, Andromeda is unique because they did a patch for higher resolutions with those mid-gen refreshes, but they never did a 60 FPS patch for Andromeda. Now, come Series X and PlayStation 5, they still didn't. Some games even did next-gen versions of their old games. Mass Effect Andromeda didn't. They famously basically stopped developing the game or working on it about a year after it came out, if that, for Anthem. That's a different video. Mark Dar has got some good ones on that. But what's interesting about with Series X is that they had a program called FPS Boost. So with FPS Boost, Microsoft essentially used technology, I assume it was machine learning or some kind of algorithm, to take old games and without the developers doing anything, making them 60 frames per second on the new consoles. Dragon Age Inquisition, which came out a few years before Andromeda, got FPS Boost. It runs at 60 FPS on Series X, but Andromeda didn't. So the two playthroughs I've done of Andromeda were 30 FPS at decent resolutions and no mods. And my experiences with it were okay. I would give Andromeda before this last playthrough a 6 out of 10, maybe a 5. It's fine. It's worth playing, especially if you're a Mass Effect fan, but probably not, my favorite, right? So after these 25 plus trilogy playthroughs I've done, I just recently finished a trilogy playthrough on PC where I used mods and pretty heavily modded the game and enjoyed it a lot. And when I finished, I had lots of choices of games to play. And what I decided to do was to actually finally mod Andromeda and play it on PC. And that changed my experience drastically. It at 60 FPS feels great. It feels really nice, and I could go higher, but I didn't. I played at 4K. It looked incredible, very pretty, really, really, despite its technical limitations and the things that never truly got fixed or changed. Very beautiful game, and just the responsiveness of it felt great. One of my big complaints about the Series X version playing it on console is that it feels pretty muddy, not very responsive. That's a big part of the 30 FPS issue, and just the way the game controls in general. I'm not going to say it's perfect, but just being able to control the game and have it smoother animations and better effects and things like that, it helped the experience. I also went into the experience in playing this game, this Andromeda playthrough, with a bunch of quality of life mods, which did help. I have a whole video about that on my YouTube channel, so check it out if you haven't already. But also, I went into it, instead of going into it like I had previously, the 2 playthroughs I did before, I finished the trilogy and then played Andromeda. And that almost set it up for failure, right? But what I did this time is I went into Andromeda thinking of it of like, okay, this game is almost certainly going to be integrated into the trilogy for this next game, whether the next game takes place hundreds of years later to sync up with the Andromeda timeline or whatever they do. One way or the other, they've hinted extremely heavily at this point that Andromeda will be melded with the trilogy in some capacity, and that's going to lead to this next game. So I need to go into this playthrough not being like, oh, I don't want this in my next game, and instead going into it being like, okay, how can they do that? And that honestly helped. It really made me look at the events and the characters and the lore and the story and everything that they present to you in Andromeda in kind of a different way. And then noticing small things that was really cool. A few years ago in some concept art, people noticed a bunch of basically like company logos in what appeared to be an Asari cityscape. And I remember a bunch of people being like, oh, those are the same logos as Andromeda. But then playing Andromeda again, those aren't the same logos as Andromeda. They are technically, but when you play Andromeda, something you have to remember is that everything in Andromeda came from the Milky Way. It came, with the initiative, it came on the arcs. So all these signs, all these companies, like we know that a bunch of these companies saw the Andromeda initiative as a chance to spread their corporation. Now, did they consider that the corporations maybe, you set up a store for, I don't know, one of the brands in Andromeda? Well, there's a really good chance, 600 years later, when the Andromeda initiative actually happens, that company back home is gone, whether it was the Reapers or whatever, right? Anyways, we'll move on from that. But just playing Andromeda this time and playing it in that mindset of like, okay, what would this mean for a new game? How would they incorporate things? Not even the gameplay and things like that, but just the fact that the Andromeda initiative exists. And then there are so many things about the Andromeda that were left open. When you finish the game, and I almost 100%ed it, all of the ally missions and the primary objectives and a lot of the side missions, there were some of the like literal like fetch quest stuff I didn't really bother with. But when you finish Andromeda, you realize like, man, there's like a whole nother arc that just never gets addressed, except at the very, very end, you basically comm chatter from the Korean arc. And, we know, or we've heard that was supposed to be DLC, and then it never happened because of Anthem and other choices. Regardless, there's a whole bunch of things that are left open and that they could, in theory, explore in a next game. I also think that I enjoyed the experience more because of I chose to do PB's romance. In previous playthroughs, I believe I'd done Korra and Vetra, and those were fine. And PB is such a controversial character in the Andromeda game and the conversation around it, because her introduction is one of the most jarring and stupid things that I've ever experienced in a video game. It's that I remember there was an edit years ago that I saw of, PB, you go to the first remnant location and PB jumps on Ryder. And it's like, if this was realistic, Liam and Cora will just lit her up and killed her. Like and it shows them like, blast her away. But the thing about PB to me, is that I really feel like her character develops very much like Jack in Mass Effect 2, where there's like an initial roughness where, maybe you don't particularly love the character, they're a bit gruff or they're a bit distant or whatever. With Jack, she's mad about everything and she was a pirate and she hurt all these people and she wants to hurt more. And then with PB, it's, she makes no connection, she's just a free spirit, she goes off, she's just investigating Remnant, doing research, all that. And then, they soften as time goes on. And I really found by the end of the game, I thought PB's romance was really sweet and really nice. And especially some of the final conversations you have and stuff are just really great. I also found I can't stand the Angaras. I hate the way they look. I hate everything about, like, I can't stand their voices, their big stupid eyes. So I'd never really given Jaal a chance before. And I literally ran with Jaal this entire game. And I really found a character who he's at least one of the more like, they spent more time on him as a character. The character model looks better. His voice actor is incredible. I love, the way he is. He very much reminds me of our Prothean friend in Mass Effect 3. And he's very much that Garrus role, right? At least for me, I've always played as male Shep, and Garrus has always been like best bro. And honestly, I almost think I might like Jaal more because Jaal is just kind of like a kinder person, or a kinder, has a kinder personality. Where if you look a little closer at Garrus in the trilogy, he's like kind of like a boot looking, like, like kind of has some fascist tendencies. It makes sense if you consider the Turian culture and all that stuff. So it's, I'm not making like a big political statement on that, but I really like Jaal. So running almost primarily with Jaal and PB through the whole game was a great experience. It very much reminds me of, I did a playthrough years ago where in Mass Effect 2, I ran the entire game with Jacob and Miranda. And I had never done that before because as soon as I got other people, I just ran with them. But what I found was that I think that game was kind of meant to be played with those two people because you have interactions with people during conversations throughout Mass Effect 2 with Jacob and Miranda in your squad that you just don't get with other characters, and some really interesting stuff. And I really liked it. I controversially came out of that kind of liking Jacob as a character, again, as an M-Shep. So anyways, I've gone on long enough. I'll just say that nothing changed about Andromeda since the last time I played it. Having a better gameplay experience was nice. Having the quality of life mods that I used was good as well. But at the end of the day, what I liked more about Andromeda was that my mindset was different. I went into it differently. One thing I also did, just as a side note, is I used the professional responses on almost everything this time, besides a few exceptions. Where previously I'd always done the emotional one. So the top left is the heart. So it's not romance, but it's the emotional responses to people. And that's where Ryder gives a lot of like really sarcastic like responses and things like that. Where the professional one really came off as, someone in Ryder's position, especially with strangers and people, in the initiative. Much of those responses seem much more like something that a real person would say, right? And I really enjoyed that. But it wasn't anything, nothing changed really about Andromeda. But what has changed is me. I've gotten older. My life is different now than it was 3-4 years ago, the last time I played it. And again, going into it, thinking about the future really changed things for me. It was, a kind of a jarring experience almost. And in playing it, not being like, oh, this isn't as good as the trilogy, but instead of thinking, man, what does this mean for the future? And I think just, without even having a ton of examples off the top of my head, there was just a lot about the game where I was like, oh, that's cool. Like, that's a cool idea. Or even thinking about like, oh, I hope they keep this for the next game. I hope they do keep this, way of interacting and so on and so forth. The way that people, one thing I loved and I only somehow noticed this time, maybe because I'd never fully upgraded my gear before, but I didn't know that as you upgrade, the initiative gear and all the different, armor sets, that they get like more complicated as you upgrade them up to tier 5. And I really liked that. I thought that was a really cool feature. So long story short, my opinion of Andromeda has gone up a lot. It makes me a whole lot less worried if they incorporate it pretty significantly in the next game, which I think they're going to, one way or the other. My only request is that they change the design of the Angaras to look more like the mural on their homeworld, Havarl. If you know what I'm talking about, you know. If not, go look it up, I guess. So that's all I have for this. Let me know what you think about Andromeda down in the comments. Consider subscribing to the channel if you want more Mass Effect news and speculation and so on, or just gaming news and speculation and so on. I try to cover it all. If you would hit the like button, I would appreciate it so more people see the video. Also, if you want to really support what I'm doing here, maybe do a little extra, consider becoming a YouTube member. You get videos like this one just a hair early, and you help me keep doing what I'm doing and justify the time. If you want to see other ways to support, look at the links in the description of the video. You can also find my other content I make down there, including a couple podcasts I have. That is all I have for this one. So until next time.